So I'm minding my own business. I get invited on Fox and Friends to talk about my objection to reparations. And I made a number of assertions about Democrats and slavery. And I got fact-checked by Politifact. Here's what I said.
The government did not own slaves. Republicans did not own slaves. Democrats owned slaves. Democrats founded the KKK. Democrats opposed the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment. As a percentage of the party, more Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 than did Democrats. Maybe
so
Democrats ought to sue themselves for reparations.
So what's the problem? I get an email from Politifact's Bill McCarthy. And here is what Mr. McCarthy said. Here are the claims I'm interested in. 1, Republicans did not own slaves. Democrats owned slaves. 2, Democrats founded the KKK. 3, Democrats opposed the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. 4, as a percentage of their party, more Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 than did Democrats. Could you please send me any evidence you have in support of these claims? End of quote. Can you please send me any evidence? No, I had no evidence. I just went out there and popped them out of my you-know-what. So I wrote back and I said, Dear Mr. McCarthy, as to no Republicans ever owning slaves, I was wrong. And I've corrected it on social media the following day. There were at least 10. As for the rest, you should have no difficulty finding your own sources. Good luck. So a few days later, I open my email and I get a thing that says, Elder, rated false. Look at it, false. All 4 false? So let's examine them in reverse order. Number 4, as a percentage of the party, more Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 than did Democrats. Well, here is what Politifact said. 61% of Democrats and 80% of Republicans voted for the bill to pass the House. The Senate passed the bill by a 73-27 margin, with about 69% of Democrats and 82% of Republicans. So, in both chambers of Congress, a greater percentage of Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 than did Democrats. Elder was right. And on the same point, check out what historian Roger McGrath says.
Well, again, you were right, because Southern Democrats were solidly opposed to that civil rights legislation of the mid-1960s.
Game to Elder. Number 3, Democrats opposed the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. Well, here's what Politifact said. It's accurate that Democrats opposed the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendments. Historians we spoke to said the majority of Reconstruction-era Democrats did, in fact, oppose these 3 amendments. Republicans led the way each time. End of quote.
The Republicans, this is in the Republican-controlled Congress at the conclusion of the Civil War. And all those amendments to abolish slavery, to protect citizenship rights of blacks and ensure that they could vote, that was all Republican agenda. And the only opposition the Republicans had in that were from Democrats in the formerly Confederate states. So all of this was Republican Party implemented these 3 critical amendments to not only free blacks but make them full citizens.
Game to Elder. Number 2, Democrats founded the KKK. Now here's where things really get interesting. Elder did not say Democrat Party founded the KKK. Elder said, and you heard it, Democrats founded the KKK. Here's what Politifact said. Many Southern whites during the 1860s and the 1870s were, in fact, Democrats. And some joined the Ku Klux Klan. But there's no evidence that the group was founded by the Democrat Party. The men who started the Klan were Southerners and almost certainly voted Democrat, but that's a far cry from the claim that the party set up the organization. End of quote, quoting a historian from Princeton named Cruz. Elder did not say the party did. Elder said Democrats did, and Politifact all but conceded they did. Again, historian Roger McGrath.
Yeah, I don't understand how they can call this fact-checking when they're misrepresenting what you said, and then proving, well, that's false. Well, you didn't represent what Larry Elder said. And all throughout here, it's exactly right. I mean, if you take a look at the party platforms of 1856 and 1860, you can see the Republican Party was all about anti-slavery and anti-expansion.
Game to Elder. Number one, Republicans did not own slaves. Democrats owned slaves. And by the way, I corrected this the following day I appeared on Fox News, and I tweeted out there were apparently at least 10 Republicans out of all the slave owners in the South who owned slaves. The next day, here's what Politifact said. The claim that Republicans did not own slaves is false. And Elder corrected the record on Twitter the next day. As to no Republicans ever owning slaves, I was wrong, says Elder. There were at least 10. Republicans were obviously the party of abolition, continues Politifact, but there were in fact Republicans who owned slaves. Cruz, the Princeton historian to whom I referred to earlier, told us. Slave owners Blair and Burton were not the only two. After conservative filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza made a similar claim on Twitter, Cruz and other historians on Twitter identified 8 more prominent Republicans who also owned slaves in 1860, end of quote. Well, if I were a Democrat, I wouldn't call those bragging rights, but okay. Let's concede that I was wrong when I said Republicans did not own slaves in the sense that they found 10 who did. So, on 3 of the 4 points, Elder was right, and on the other point, the only problem was Elder was off by 10 Republicans. Honestly.
So when you say, well, the Republicans were not the party of slavery, Republicans didn't own slaves, well, a few individual Republicans may have owned slaves, but that's not what the party was about. And you can see that very clearly in their platform statements. You can see that in their slogans. The Republican Party of 1856, when they ran John C. Fremont for the president, it was a free soil, free men, free labor, Fremont. I mean, they couldn't be more explicit in what they were all about.
I want to end with this. Republican leader Mitch McConnell was asked his thoughts on reparations. Here's what he said.
Before the Civil War, and has that revelation caused you to change your position on reparations?
You know, I find myself once again in the same position as President Obama. We both oppose reparations, and we both are the descendants of slaveholders.
That is a bit of a problem, isn't it? And someone like Kamala Harris, her father Jamaican, her mother Indian, her father admitted that his ancestors owned slaves. So does Kamala Harris cut a check? Does she receive a check? Does she write a check? How does that work? I'm Larry Elder. This has been the Larry Elder Show for Epic Times.